The void was silent, yet alive. Trillions of stars blinked weakly, their light straining through the cold emptiness, as if the galaxy itself were holding its breath. Bastion Primaris, jewel and bastion of the dying Catan Imperium, floated amid the wreckage of countless worlds. Its towers rose like jagged teeth from the shattered crust of the planet below, while the skies burned with the echoes of war. Smoke coiled from shattered spires and fractured cities, drifting into the void where it dissolved into nothingness. Even from orbit, the anguish of the planet was visible, as if its suffering radiated across the void, staining the very light of nearby suns. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Marshal Cale Draven stood atop the command spire, his gaze stretching across the desolate expanse of the planetary surface. His armor, once polished to reflect the light of 100 victories, now bore the soot and scars of endless sieges. He felt the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders, the cold knowledge that time had not softened the sting of mortality, nor had it eased the ceaseless demand of duty. Even immortality, the unnatural gift of the Bastion Primaris, came at a price. One watched allies die again and again, empires rise only to crumble, and still one endured. Yet in this moment, Cale felt something more acute than the usual ache of timeless service. There was uncertainty, there was doubt, and beneath all, there was fear, a raw, human fear, subtle and sharp, that even his centuries of discipline could not entirely conceal. The warning sirens screamed across the shattered spires as he turned to watch the first signs of the approaching fleet. Dark vessels, vast and silent, moved like predators through the void, their engines burning with the cold light of the warp. Cale's jaw tightened. Their arrival had been expected, yet he could not shake the sense that the true threat was something more insidious, something that would pierce deeper than even the most disciplined strike of their enemy. "Marshal," a voice called, resonant and calm amidst the chaos. Captain Solara Voss approached, her own armor scarred and dulled by battle. "The outer batteries are holding, but not for long. They move with purpose, as if they know our every maneuver before we make it." Kyle nodded, though his eyes remained on the horizon. "Purpose, or prophecy," he muttered. There was a faint, bitter edge to his tone. The elders of Bastion Primaris had long whispered of forces that moved unseen, manipulating fates like threads in a loom. He had dismissed them in the past. Now, as the cold void swallowed the light of another star, he wondered whether they were closer to truth than legend. Solara studied him, her brow furrowed. "You doubt yourself, Marshal." Cale's eyes finally met hers, reflecting a glint of weariness that belied his millennia of experience. "Not myself," he said slowly. "I doubt the choices we are forced to make, the lives we must sacrifice, the betrayals we may be blind to, and still we endure. But at what cost?" A silence followed, broken only by the distant roar of energy cannons tearing into the outer defenses. Kyle turned to survey the battlements. Figures moved in the smoke, soldiers of Bastion Primaris, whose faces were hidden behind helmets, whose voices were muffled by comms, but whose fear was no less palpable. They fought because it was demanded of them, not because they wished to. And like him, they would endure, because immortality is a chain as much as it is a gift. A flash of movement caught his attention. High above the surface, in the orbital docks, a single figure advanced against the tide of preparation and panic. Advisor Torvak, ever calm, ever calculating, stepped into view. His robes whispered over the metallic decking, and his eyes, sharp, cold, unyielding, seemed to pierce straight into Kale's thoughts. "Marshal," Torvak said, voice smooth as obsidian, "you feel the weight of inevitability tonight. I can sense it. The enemy does not merely approach. They probe, they test, and they wait. And even now, the foundations of Bastion Primaris tremble, not from their guns, but from what lies within." Kale's hand tightened around the railing. "And you would have me trust your insight, advisor, even as the walls burn." Torvak's lips curved faintly. "Trust is a luxury, Marshal. Knowledge is a weapon, and weapons, like empires, must be wielded wisely, or they consume their master." Kale turned back to the void, feeling the subtle pull of despair and duty entwined. He thought of the men and women who had followed him through centuries of campaigns, who had trusted his judgment even when it meant walking into fire. He thought of Solara, of Morthane, of those whose loyalty had never wavered, or so it seemed. He wondered how many were already lost to ambition, or desperation, or betrayal. In the distance, the fleet moved closer. Shapes emerged from the shadows of the void. Warships of unknown origin, their hulls impossibly large, their weapons poised with silent menace. Kyle knew that the coming days would test more than his skill in battle. They would test his very soul. And yet, a part of him, the part that had survived countless sieges, that had outlived empires, that had seen the rise and fall of planets, recognized the truth of his existence. He was a guardian of inevitability. Every decision, every sacrifice, every act of defiance was a thread in a tapestry that he may never see completed. The question was not whether he would endure, but what he would endure for, and what, in the end, would endure after him. He turned to Solara once more, eyes like steel. "Rally the defenses," he commanded, voice steady. "We do not simply survive because we are commanded. We survive because we refuse to surrender. And if the galaxy wishes to test us, let it come. Let it see what Bastion Primaris endures." Solara nodded, her own resolve hardening in the reflection of Kale's determination. As she ran to carry out his orders, Kale lingered, letting the cold wind of the void brush against his armored face. His thoughts drifted for a moment, fleeting and bitter, to the countless victories that had meant nothing, to the lives lost to eternity's cruel design. He felt the faintest stirrings of doubt, an echo of mortality within the heart of one who had long forgotten its taste. The distant stars began to fade, one by one, their light swallowed by darkness and ash. Bastion Primaris held on, trembling yet unbroken. And in the vast emptiness, Marshal Kale Draven understood a simple, terrible truth, that even immortality could not protect the heart from fear, nor the mind from betrayal. The galaxy waited, the fleet advanced, and Kale's first test had begun. The corridors of Bastion Primaris were a labyrinth of steel and shadow, echoing with the distant clang of preparation and the whispered prayers of soldiers too long accustomed to loss. Marshal Kale Draven moved through them, his presence a silent command, yet the weight of centuries pressed against him with every step. Unlike the battlefield's clarity, here, within the walls of his own command, the uncertainty gnawed. Allies smiled with fatigue, officers nodded with practiced obedience, but Kyle sensed the fissures beneath the surface. Captain Solara Voss awaited him in the central command chamber. Her armor, darkened by smoke and soot, bore the marks of countless skirmishes. Her eyes, however, were clear, unflinching, a mirror of Kyle's own grim determination. "Marshal," she said, her voice steady, "the soldiers look to you. Morale is fraying faster than the walls. Some whisper of betrayal, others of surrender. I fear the longer the siege holds, the greater the strain on even the most disciplined. Kyle nodded, his gaze lingering on the hololithic display of the planetary defenses. Dots of light represented battalions. Red lines traced enemy advances, and streaks of energy marked the orbiting fleet's silent encirclement. Each marker was a life. Each life was a thread in the tenuous tapestry he bore alone. Discipline can only endure so long, Kyle murmured. Hope must follow, and hope is fragile. Solara studied him, tilting her head. You carry the weight of centuries, Marshal, perhaps more than any mortal or immortal should. He turned to her, expression hard. Perhaps, but it is not my weight alone that matters. It is the weight of those who trust us, who follow us into the void of impossibility. If I falter, they all fall, and I will not allow it. The silence between them was thick, but it carried unspoken understanding. Kyle had led Bastion Primaris through countless sieges, each more harrowing than the last. His soldiers had survived because he endured, because his immortality allowed him to endure. But that endurance, relentless and eternal, came with a cost. Each victory left him hollow, each loss seared into memory for all time. And now, as the enemy tightened its grip, Kyle sensed the fragile unity of his command could splinter at any moment. Marshal, a softer voice interrupted, smooth as shadow. May I speak? Advisor Torvak stepped forward, robes whispering over the metal floor, eyes glinting with unreadable purpose. The tides of war are predictable only to the unimaginative. We face more than mere enemies here. We face the erosion of faith, the corrosion of loyalty, the quiet treacheries that flourish when hope is scarce. Kyle's hand brushed the edge of the command table. You speak in riddles, Torvak. Are you warning me of spies among us, or merely reminding me of my own mortality? Torvak's gaze did not waver. Both, Marshal, and neither. What you must understand is that even the most loyal heart can falter when survival is at stake. Decisions must be made swiftly, yet with care, for every choice ripples outward. Betrayal is not always malicious. It is sometimes inevitable. Kyle's jaw tightened. He knew the weight of those words. The whispers of rebellion had already begun among certain regiments. An officer here, a soldier there, questioning the cost of immortality and endless campaigns. He knew he could not allow dissent to grow, yet crushing it outright might destroy the fragile bonds that held the Primaris together. Balance, strategy, and instinct must all converge in one mind. A mind stretched across centuries, yet still human in its fears. Solara stepped closer, lowering her voice. There is another matter. General Morthane requests audience. He claims to have intelligence regarding the incoming fleet, but he also demands autonomy over certain maneuvers. I do not trust his timing, nor his insistence. It feels like a challenge. Kyle's eyes narrowed. Morthane had always been ambitious, brilliant in strategy, yet prone to taking liberties with orders when it suited him. Loyalty was a mantle easily donned and easily discarded. Bring him in, Kyle said at last. We shall see if his ambitions align with the defense of Bastion Primaris, or its undoing. Moments later, the chamber doors hissed open. General Morthane entered, broad-shouldered and imposing, every step deliberate, every motion commanding. His eyes, dark and sharp, swept over Kale and Solara, lingering briefly on Torvak as though measuring the advisor's threat. Marshal, he said, voice steady but edged with impatience. The fleet moves faster than anticipated. We may have hours, not days. I recommend aggressive countermeasures before they breach our outer perimeter. Kael's gaze met Morthane's, steady and unwavering. And you would have us act without full intelligence? You would gamble the lives of our soldiers because the enemy moves with purpose? Morthane's jaw tightened. Purpose or hesitation is irrelevant if we fail to act decisively. Delay is fatal. Torvak's voice cut softly through the tension. Decisive action is commendable. Recklessness is the cousin of ruin. Marshal, consider the ripples of each choice, each sacrifice, before committing your hand. What may seem urgent now could blossom into catastrophe later. Kael's fingers flexed against the table. He could feel the centuries of experience and the burdens of immortality colliding with the immediacy of the siege. Lives, legacies, betrayals. Each demanded recognition. Each demanded a choice. Finally, Kael spoke. We prepare the defenses. I will meet the enemy on the terms we choose, not the ones they impose. And yet, he paused, voice lowering, reflective. We remain vigilant for the whispers in our midst. Loyalty may be tested not only by the enemy, but by time itself. And if any falter, if any betray, they will find no mercy here. Solara's eyes glimmered with quiet resolve. Morthane bristled, but said nothing. Torvak inclined his head, inscrutable, as though the decision pleased him, or satisfied some hidden curiosity. As Kael turned to leave, he allowed himself a brief moment alone in the command chamber. The hololithic maps glowed, showing the fragile positions of his forces and the encroaching enemy. He traced the lines with his fingers, imagining each life, each mind, each soldier entrusted to his command. He felt the weight of centuries, the burden of immortality, and the cruel beauty of it all. To live forever was not to triumph forever. It was to witness unending cycles of loyalty and betrayal, of hope and despair, of rise and fall. He understood then that leadership was not merely strategy, not merely courage. It was the capacity to endure, through loss, through deceit, through the inexorable passage of time. And Bastion Primaris would endure, if only because he refused to let it die. But endurance was only the beginning. Survival demanded vigilance, and vigilance demanded choices. Difficult, unrelenting, and irrevocable. The corridors echoed with the distant march of soldiers preparing for the night to come. Kael Draven felt their eyes, their unspoken questions, and knew that the burden of command was heavier than any armor, sharper than any blade. Yet he would bear it. He always had. And in the shadows of Bastion Primaris, as the stars flickered like dying embers above the horizon, the first true test of the siege awaited him. Not merely in the enemy's assault, but in the fragile, unsteady hearts of those he called his own. Night fell over Bastion Primaris like a shroud of ash, the sky a canvas of dying stars and drifting smoke. The battlements glimmered faintly, illuminated by the scattered fires of distant skirmishes and the eerie glow of orbiting warships. Within the corridors of the fortress, whispers moved faster than footsteps, carrying rumors of betrayal, despair, and impossible hope. Even in the dim glow of the command spire, Marshal Kael Draven could feel it, the pulse of unease threading through the ranks. He walked slowly, allowing the weight of the corridors to press against him. Each step echoed, not only across steel and stone, but through memory. He remembered previous sieges, countless planets lost and reclaimed, faces of soldiers long dead, and the hollow victories that never satisfied the mind nor the heart. Immortality carried with it a curse, to endure while the world crumbled, to watch allies falter, and to see betrayal bloom in unexpected corners. A soft voice called from the shadows. "Marshal?" It was Lieutenant Arvin, a young officer who had survived barely a decade, but had already learned the discipline demanded by centuries of tradition. There are rumors among the ranks. Some speak of the outer regiments being infiltrated. Others whisper that our enemy has allies among the civilian enclaves. They fear, Marshal. They fear betrayal from within. Kyle stopped, his eyes narrowing. The suspicion was no surprise, yet it carried its own poison. Fear spread faster than bullets, faster than fire. He studied Arvin for a moment, recognizing the mixture of loyalty and terror that defined the youth. "And you?" Kyle asked quietly. "Do you believe these whispers, Lieutenant?" Arvin hesitated, the weight of Kyle's gaze pressing upon him. I do not know. But soldiers need certainty, Marshal. And in these hours, certainty is scarce." Kyle's jaw tightened. Certainty was a relic of the past, a comfort for those who did not live beyond the span of ordinary lifetimes. "Then give them resolve," he said softly. "Not certainty. Resolve. They will falter if they rely on hope alone. But if they rely on purpose, they endure. That is the gift and the curse of Bastion Primaris." He moved deeper into the command spire, the corridors narrowing and twisting as though designed to confuse the mind as much as the enemy. Hololithic displays shimmered with data, fleet movements, energy readings, and the faint flickers of unverified intelligence. Kyle's eyes lingered on a particular report. A regiment stationed on the eastern plateau had sent fragmented communications, erratic in both tone and detail. The words defection and unrest appeared, though the source remained unclear. Solara appeared beside him, her voice a low counterpoint to the silent hum of the displays. "I have sent scouts to verify," she said, "but the reports are troubling. If even one regiment falters, it could compromise the entire perimeter." Kyle's hand brushed the edge of the table. "Then we watch, we wait, and we act with precision. Nothing more, nothing less. Lives hang in balance, Solara, and in the calculus of immortality, each life is a burden we carry forever." A shadow moved behind them. Torvak stepped forward, robes brushing the floor, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Marshal, the whispers are not idle. They carry substance, though it is hidden. The enemy seeks not only to breach your walls, but to unravel the hearts and minds of those who dwell within them. Even now, the seed of treachery grows unnoticed. By the time it is revealed, it may be too late." Kyle's gaze did not leave the hololithic display. "And yet, we endure. Always, we endure. The question is, how many betrayals can we survive before endurance itself becomes meaningless?" Torvak inclined his head as if granting the thought its weight. "That, Marshal, is the eternal question. The answer is known only to those who have walked centuries, who have seen empires crumble and rise again. And you, perhaps more than any other, know that the heart is the most dangerous battlefield of all." A distant alarm shattered the quiet, piercing the spire with a shrill note. Sensors had detected movement near the eastern plateau. Kyle moved swiftly, Solara following closely. As they approached the eastern battlements, the view opened to reveal the regiment in question. Fires burned along the ridges, and the once stalwart soldiers moved with hesitation. Hesitation born of fear and confusion. Something had shaken their discipline. Something unseen. Kyle's eyes scanned the formation. There were no signs of the enemy yet, only the trembling human. No, Primaris, hearts that had once stood unwavering. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence of impending betrayal almost tangible. "Marshal," Solara said, voice tight, "if they falter, the outer defenses will collapse. We may lose the plateau before reinforcements arrive. Kyle nodded, the centuries of experience sharpening his focus. Then we act, but carefully. Too much force risks provoking the very treachery we seek to prevent. Discipline must be restored, not broken. He descended among the soldiers, his presence commanding even without words. He spoke of purpose, of legacy, of the honor of Bastion Primaris, and of the cost of immortality. Slowly, hesitantly, the trembling began to fade. Orders were followed once more, though uncertainty lingered beneath every gesture, a subtle reminder that even the most steadfast could falter. Yet Kyle's mind did not rest. He sensed that the tremors of dissent were only the beginning, that unseen hands guided fear and ambition alike. Somewhere, among the smoke and steel, someone or something watched, waited, and whispered. And that whisper could carry farther than any cannon, sharper than any blade, striking at the very foundation of trust. Returning to the command spire, Cale allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The weight of centuries pressed on him, the burden of immortality heavy in his chest. Every victory, every survival, came with the same silent question. Who among them would falter next? Who would betray, whether through fear, ambition, or the slow corrosion of loyalty? He looked out once more at the burning horizon, the fleet in orbit, like predators circling the dying prey of Bastion Primaris. Even now, as the enemy prepared to strike, Kyle understood that the first battles were not fought with guns or blades, but with trust, doubt, and the fragile human hearts of those who had sworn eternity to his command. The siege had begun, but the true war, the war of shadows, of suspicion, of internal fracture, had already taken root, and Marshal Kyle Draven, immortal and burdened, knew that survival depended not only on strength and strategy, but on the delicate balance of loyalty, fear, and the eternal vigilance of one who has outlived every certainty. The corridors whispered, the fires flickered, and the stars above faded further. Bastion Primaris held, for now. But the night was long, and the seeds of betrayal had been sown. The first light of the distant suns barely penetrated the ash-choked skies above Bastion Primaris. The battlements were alive with movement, soldiers marching to positions, energy turrets humming as they came online, and the muted cries of the wounded carried along the corridors. The siege was no longer a distant threat. It was immediate, relentless, and exacting. Marshal Cale Draven surveyed the outer defences from the command spire, his armour dull with soot, yet reflecting faintly the cold, pale light of the war-torn skies. Every decision he made, every order given, carried consequences beyond comprehension. One choice could save a regiment, another could doom a city. And yet, in the calculus of immortality, even victory carried a weight far greater than most could bear. Captain Solara Voss approached, her steps measured but unyielding. "Marshal," she said, voice quiet, "the eastern garrison reports civilian enclaves are being encroached upon. The enemy's skirmishers move with subtlety, targeting undefended districts. They leave us a choice: divert troops to protect innocents, or concentrate on the fortifications. Both courses carry risk." Kyle's eyes traced the pale outlines of the cities below, smoke curling like ghosts from broken towers. He felt the familiar tug of conflict within his chest, the tension between duty and conscience, between logic and compassion. Every soldier entrusted to him was a thread in the fragile fabric of Bastion Primaris. And yet the civilians, untrained and unarmed, represented a cost he could not ignore. To defend them was to risk the strength of his defences, To abandon them was to stain the legacy of his command. He exhaled slowly. "Gather the reports," he commanded, "and bring me the commanders. We will decide the course together. But understand this: every life is a debt, every choice a potential betrayal. The enemy will exploit hesitation. We cannot afford it." Moments later, the chamber filled with officers, some seasoned, some barely decades old, but all bearing the mark of unwavering service. General Morthane stood with arms crossed, expression rigid. Torvak lingered at the rear, silent, eyes glinting with inscrutable calculation. Solara moved to Kale's side, offering support, but leaving the weight of the final decision upon him. "The enemy presses forward," Morthane said bluntly. "If we split our forces, we risk losing both the cities and the outer defenses. They will breach our walls, and the plateau will fall before reinforcements can arrive. Decisive action is necessary. Hold nothing back." Kyle's gaze swept across the assembled officers. He saw fear, resolve, and ambition reflected in their faces. Yet behind every expression lay uncertainty. The heart of Bastion Primaris was fragile, even in its immensity, and one misstep could unravel centuries of discipline. Torvak stepped forward, voice calm, yet laden with subtle menace. "The choice is more complex than brute force suggests. Protecting civilians may embolden loyalty among the populace, yet weakens our line. Ignoring them preserves military advantage, yet seeds resentment that may flourish into betrayal. Every decision is a gamble, and the stakes are eternal." Kyle felt the centuries of his life pressing against him, the weight of victories, defeats, and the endless repetition of both. He knew the cost of choice and the cost of inaction. One path offered fleeting certainty but enduring guilt. The other offered tactical advantage but moral corrosion. Either way, he would carry the burden, unrelenting and eternal. "Marshal," Solara said, her voice soft but insistent, "the soldiers follow you because you endure. But the civilians, they follow because of what you represent. If we forsake them, we risk losing more than terrain. We risk losing hearts. And without hearts, even the strongest defenses crumble." Kyle's jaw tightened. She was right. Loyalty was a fragile commodity, even among the immortal. Betrayal was born not only from ambition, but from neglect, from fear, from the perception that one's life or purpose was disregarded. And now the time to act had come. "Deploy 2 regiments to the civilian sectors," Kyle decided, voice steady. "Reinforce the outer walls with the remaining forces. The rest, maintain vigilance. Every soldier is a pivot. Every decision may be the difference between survival and annihilation. If any falter, they answer to me, and I will not forgive failure born of cowardice or neglect." Morthane bristled, lips tightening in disagreement, but said nothing. Torvak inclined his head subtly, as if acknowledging a move anticipated long ago. Solara's eyes met Kael's, silent approval passing between them. Orders were dispatched immediately. The corridors became alive with urgency, soldiers moving to defend districts, while others fortified walls. Energy turrets powered up, glowing faintly against the choking darkness of smoke and ash. Kyle watched it all, knowing the outcome was not certain, yet necessary. Leadership demanded it. Sacrifice required it. Immortality demanded it. Hours passed. Reports filtered through the command spire. The regiments sent to protect civilians moved with precision and courage, facing skirmishes that struck with subtle cruelty. Some districts were saved. Others suffered losses that could not be calculated in numbers alone. The weight of mortality pressed against Kyle's conscience. He saw the faces of the fallen, knew the names of those who would not endure another century, and felt the sting of responsibility sharper than any blade. Yet even as the battle raged, he sensed a deeper threat, the silent erosion of loyalty among those who survived. Whispers of doubt, quiet murmurs questioning command, and the subtle glances of officers like Morthane suggested that the real war might already be within. Bastion Primaris was not merely under siege from the enemy, it was under siege from the weight of its own eternity. Kyle retreated briefly to the observation balcony. The horizon burned, warships of the enemy glinting in the dim light, while fires on the surface etched patterns of devastation across the land. Immortality had taught him to see these patterns as both inevitable and cruelly beautiful. Civilizations rise, fall, and fade. Loyalty endures, yet fractures. Betrayal appears even where trust once flourished. And he, Cale Draven, would witness it all, and bear the burden of every decision, every death, and every failure. He turned to Solara, her armor streaked with soot, her expression steady despite the chaos. "Do you ever wonder, Solara," Cale asked quietly, "if our endurance is a gift or a curse? To survive everything, to see all fall around us and still continue?" Solara's eyes met his. "I do," she admitted. "But it is not for us to choose the weight. It is for us to bear it. And in bearing it, we define what survives after us." Kyle nodded, letting the words settle. The night deepened, and the fires of Bastion Primaris glimmered like faint embers against the void. The siege had tested strategy, morality, and loyalty alike. The first decisive choice had been made, and though victory had been partial, the cost was tangible in the hearts of every soldier, every civilian, and every immortal soul who called Bastion Primaris home. As the stars flickered faintly above, Kyle Draven understood that the coming days would demand more than courage. They would demand wisdom, resilience, and the unyielding ability to endure, no matter how bitter or lonely the path might become. For in the endless cycle of war and eternity, leadership was never merely command. It was the relentless bearing of consequences and the quiet courage to choose again and again in the shadow of death and betrayal. The corridors of Bastion Primaris hummed with a tension that was almost tangible, a pressure that bore down not with the weight of stone, but with the weight of uncertainty and suspicion. The siege had continued for days, and while the walls held and the civilians remained largely safe, Kyle Draven felt a deeper disturbance growing, a shadow within the very heart of his command. Captain Solara Voss had returned from the eastern districts, her armor scorched and dented, her eyes sharp with exhaustion. "Marshal," she said, voice low, "I fear the whispers are more than rumors. Some officers have spoken in veiled terms, questioning orders, questioning our purpose. There is unease, perhaps even dissent." Kyle nodded, the centuries of his life pressing down on him like lead. He had seen this before, whispers growing into defiance, loyalty giving way to ambition or fear. Immortality had taught him to endure everything, yet it had also taught him that the most dangerous enemy often came from within. "And the regiments?" he asked. "Have they faltered?" Solara shook her head. "Not yet, but it is close. Even among the veterans, there is hesitation. They look to you for certainty, but I can see the doubt in their eyes." Kyle's jaw tightened. He understood. Leadership in Bastion Primaris was not only about commanding strategy, it was about commanding faith, trust, and the fragile threads that held centuries of soldiers together. If those threads broke, the walls themselves would fall. Torvak's presence emerged behind them, silent as the shadows. His robes brushed against the metallic floor, and his eyes gleamed with that inscrutable calculation that had haunted Kyle since the beginning of the siege. "Marshal," he said softly, "I have observed the council, the officers, even the soldiers themselves. Discontent is subtle, but it exists. A whisper here, a glance there, a hesitation in obedience. Small fractures that grow unnoticed until they can no longer be ignored." Kyle clenched his fists, the metal of his gauntlets biting into his palms. "And you would have me confront it openly?" he asked. "Do we punish suspicion, or do we allow it to grow until the first act of treachery confirms it?" Torvak's eyes did not waver. "Neither, Marshal. We observe, we understand, and then we act. Too harsh, and loyalty dies. Too soft, and betrayal blooms." Morthane entered abruptly, steps heavy and deliberate. His expression was taut with frustration. "Marshal, the Eastern Garrison has reports of unauthorized maneuvers. Some officers took initiative, ignoring orders. If this continues, our perimeter is compromised. You must act decisively." Kyle's gaze met Morthane's. The general had always been ambitious, brilliant in strategy, yet his insistence on unilateral action had long been a source of tension. "And if their initiative succeeds?" Kyle asked, voice measured, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily against his chest. "Do we reward recklessness or punish foresight?" Morthane's jaw tightened. "You cannot hesitate while the enemy probes. Every delay risks our lives." Solara stepped forward. "Marshal, the point is not just strategy, it is loyalty. If we punish initiative too harshly, the officers will fear you. If we ignore it, the chain of command weakens. The siege is not merely against our enemy, it is against the erosion of trust within these walls." Kyle's eyes flicked to the hololithic display. The enemy fleet hovered beyond orbital range, silent and precise. But the threat that pressed closest was far more intimate. The subtle fractures among his officers, the whispered doubts, and the fear of betrayal gnawed at him more than any cannon blast or skirmishing fleet. Immortality had shown him one truth above all. Time revealed everything, even the deepest treachery. "Bring them to me," Kyle said finally. "All who are suspected of hesitation, doubt, or defiance. They will answer before the council. Not with accusations, but with truths. If loyalty cannot be proven, consequences will follow, and I will not hesitate to bear them myself." Solara's lips pressed into a thin line, worry shadowing her features. "Marshal, the council may fracture under scrutiny. Even trusted officers may resent the interrogation." Kale's gaze hardened. "Then they will learn that loyalty is not a courtesy. It is a covenant, and those who break it, knowingly or unknowingly, will answer not to rumor, but to justice. We endure because we are steadfast. We fall because we allow doubt to spread unchecked." The officers were summoned. One by one, they entered the chamber, each carrying the weight of uncertainty like armor. Their faces were solemn, masks of discipline hiding fear, shame, or resentment. Kyle observed each carefully, noting subtle shifts in posture, the tension of hands, the fleeting glances exchanged. These were the first true tests of internal loyalty, and he knew the outcome would ripple across the siege like shockwaves. He began with questions not of orders, but of purpose. "Why do you serve Bastion Primaris?" he asked. "Why do you endure, knowing the enemy surrounds us and the weight of eternity presses upon your shoulders?" The answers came cautiously, some rehearsed, some raw with honesty. "For the honor of the Imperium," one said. Another whispered, "Because to abandon duty is to abandon ourselves." Kyle listened, noting which hearts spoke with conviction and which trembled under the strain. And then came the subtle revelations: hesitation, excuses, the faintest glimmer of ambition or fear. One officer admitted to questioning Cale's orders during the Eastern deployment, claiming only to have sought better protection for civilians. Another confessed to hearing rumors of a spy among the ranks, but had chosen silence, fearing repercussions. Kyle absorbed every word, weighing intention against outcome, morality against necessity. Immortality had taught him the long view. Betrayal was rarely outright. It was subtle, born of fear, ambition, or despair. To punish recklessly would destroy loyalty. To ignore could destroy everything. Torvak, standing at the rear, allowed no expression to betray his judgment. Kyle knew the advisor was calculating, watching the reactions as carefully as he did, and perhaps even shaping his perception with every measured step. Morthane's jaw tightened as he observed the council unravel, silent fury burning behind disciplined eyes. Finally, Kale spoke, his voice steady and absolute. "We endure because we understand purpose and consequence. Today, no one dies for hesitation. Today, we reinforce loyalty, and we remind ourselves of the covenant that binds us to Bastion Primaris. But know this: every decision from this moment onward carries weight. Every act of doubt, every whisper of betrayal, every failure to act will be noted, measured, and answered. Eternity does not forgive weakness. We do not forgive weakness." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the distant echoes of artillery beyond the walls and the faint hum of the orbital fleet. The officers lowered their heads, absorbing both relief and warning, and Kyle felt the first true consolidation of resolve among his inner circle. For now, loyalty was reinforced, suspicion contained. Yet the shadow of doubt lingered, like a storm on the horizon waiting to break. Kyle moved back to the observation balcony, shoulders tense but mind alert. The siege continued, but a subtle battle within had been fought, and won for the time being. He understood that this war would never be merely against the enemy outside. It was fought equally within hearts and minds, among those who swore eternity to his command. And in the distant horizon, beyond the smoke and fire of Bastion Primaris, Kale Draven knew that the first true seeds of betrayal had been sown, even as the fortress endured. Immortality had taught him that time revealed all truths, and some truths could destroy everything before the enemy ever fired a shot. The smoke from the eastern districts had barely begun to clear when reports arrived of enemy movements near the northern perimeter. Bastion Primaris had endured many assaults, yet each new strike carried a peculiar weight, as if the universe itself was testing not only the walls, but the hearts of those within. Marshal Kale Draven stood on the observation balcony, his gaze fixed on the horizon where shadowy forms drifted against the dim glow of the dying suns. Captain Solara Voss approached silently, her boots echoing softly against the steel catwalk. "Marshal," she said, voice measured, "the northern regiments report unusual formations, skirmishers moving as if guided by knowledge of our defenses, anticipating our responses. It is subtle, but deliberate. Someone, or something, prepares for more than just an assault." Kyle's eyes narrowed. Centuries of war had taught him to read subtleties: hesitation, repetition, the patterns of deception. "And the commanders, are they aligned?" he asked. Solara's shoulders stiffened. Some are hesitant. After the council, morale improved slightly, but unease remains. Detect apprehension in eyes that were once steady, and whispers are returning, more cautious, more secretive. The weight of immortality pressed against Karl again, heavier with each passing day. The siege was not merely an external threat. It was a crucible that revealed the deepest fractures within the soul of Bastion Primaris. He had survived centuries of war, but never had he faced a siege where suspicion, fear, and the enemy's cunning intertwined so seamlessly. Torvak's voice came softly from the shadows, as if emerging from the void itself. Marshal, the enemy seeks not just our walls, but our hearts, and we are not infallible. Even you, eternal as you are, cannot guard against every uncertainty. Kyle turned slowly to the advisor. And yet, Torvak, we endure. Every assault, every whisper, every betrayal we survive strengthens the resolve. But how much strain can loyalty endure before it fractures irreparably? The question hung in the air, heavier than any artillery fire. Torvak inclined his head, expression unreadable. Until it is tested to its limits. And make no mistake, Marshal, the tests are coming. The mind, more than the body, will break first. A commotion at the entry to the balcony drew Cale's attention. Lieutenant Arvin appeared, a hololithic report flickering in his hands. Marshal, he said urgently, we have intercepted encrypted communications. Enemy vessels are coordinating with unknown contacts on the planet. The language is fractured, unfamiliar, yet patterns indicate inside knowledge of our fortifications and troop movements. Kyle's gaze sharpened. Inside knowledge, he repeated, letting the phrase settle like ice in his chest. Meaning we have been observed, studied, perhaps betrayed. And yet, by whom? Solara stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. It may be deliberate misinformation, Marshal. The enemy may be sowing doubt as much as seeking tactical advantage. Cale's lips pressed together. He had endured countless wars, yet each brought new revelations. Betrayal was rarely overt. It was subtle, patient, deliberate. To act too soon was to risk destroying trust. To act too late was to invite ruin. We must verify. We will trace these communications and observe who responds, who hesitates, who falters. The first tremor of treachery must be uncovered before it spreads. Morthane appeared then, steps brisk, expression rigid with suppressed impatience. Marshal, observation delays response. If there is treachery, it is already active. We risk the northern plateau if we hesitate. Cale's eyes met Morthane's, unflinching. And if we act without understanding, we risk destroying loyalty, fracturing command, and alienating hearts that are still ours to command. The cost of a wrong decision may outweigh any immediate tactical gain. Torvak's eyes glimmered in the low light. Decisions are burdens, Marshal, not conveniences, and the weight of eternity ensures that every choice echoes far beyond the moment. Choose wisely, for history will remember not only the walls that fell, but the hearts that were lost first. Kyle turned his gaze back to the horizon. The northern sky shimmered with faint energy signatures, almost imperceptible in the haze of smoke and fire. The enemy moved with patience, precision, and understanding. And somewhere among his own officers, in the shadows of loyalty and obedience, there were those whose hearts had already begun to waver. Prepare countermeasures, Kyle finally commanded. Deploy reconnaissance units to intercept these transmissions. Trace every signal and observe every response. The enemy has sought insight into our defenses, but we will uncover it. Every hesitation, every misstep, every faltering heart will be accounted for. Solara inclined her head. And the civilians, Marshal, the districts remain vulnerable. We cannot leave them unguarded while tracing internal threats. Kale's eyes hardened, reflecting centuries of responsibility and the cold logic of survival. Two priorities at once, he said. We split attention where necessary, but ensure that no one area is left undefended. There will be losses. Some sacrifices are inevitable, yet we minimize where we can. This is the calculus of command: imperfect, necessary, eternal. As the hours passed, the reconnaissance units moved with careful precision, tracing communications and observing reactions. Patterns emerged: hesitation among minor officers, subtle divergences from protocol, and veiled glances that hinted at secrets. Kyle noted each, storing them in memory as meticulously as battle plans. Each observation, another thread in the tapestry of survival. By nightfall, the first confrontation was inevitable. An officer of moderate rank had acted on flawed intelligence, deploying troops against a phantom threat. The result: minor casualties, confusion, and the first true manifestation of internal fracture. Kyle did not speak immediately. He observed, measured, and waited until the council convened once more. In the chamber, faces were tense. Morthane bristled with anger. Solara was calm but watchful. Torvak was inscrutable. Kyle's voice was low but carried the authority of eternity. Mistakes have been made. We will correct them without destroying loyalty, yet we will not tolerate further hesitation or failure. Consider this both warning and lesson. Trust is fragile. Betrayal is subtle, and both will be punished if necessary. A heavy silence followed. The officers absorbed both admonition and assurance, understanding that the burden of immortality, of leadership, and of vigilance was shared by all, yet ultimately borne by one. Kyle Draven, as ever, carried it alone. The northern sky glimmered with faint signs of the enemy's presence, yet the true battle was within the walls of Bastion Primaris. Hearts, minds, and loyalties would be tested more than the ramparts, and Kale knew that the coming days would demand every measure of endurance, every ounce of wisdom, and the unflinching resolve to act against both foes seen and unseen. For in the long shadow of immortality, the greatest threats were never merely external. They were the tremors within, the first stirrings of betrayal, doubt, and the erosion of trust that no cannon could ever destroy. The horizon ignited with sudden light as the enemy fleet struck, cascading plasma and ion fire across the northern plateau. Bastion Primaris trembled under the impact, a reverberation that echoed not only through stone and steel, but through the hearts of those who had sworn eternity to its defense. Marshal Kyle Draven stood on the observation balcony, immovable, eyes narrowed against the haze of destruction, the centuries of his life bracing him for the trials yet to come. The northern defenses were already in motion. Turrets adjusted their angles, energy shields hummed as they absorbed the first volleys, and the soldiers of Bastion Primaris moved with disciplined precision, though the tension in their steps betrayed the gravity of the assault. Captain Solara Voss approached, her armor scarred by debris and sparks. "Marshal, the enemy's formations are precise," she said, voice tight but steady. "They anticipate our movements, strike where they predict weakness. This is no mere assault. It is a calculated probe, testing our cohesion, our reaction times, and perhaps our loyalty." Kyle's gaze swept across the battlefield. The enemy moved with an intelligence that was unsettling, as if guided by knowledge gained from within. "Then we respond with foresight," he said. "Anticipate the probe, redirect our forces, and reveal their tactics to our advantage. Every movement must be deliberate, every decision weighed. This is not just war, it is a test of discipline, trust, and endurance." Torvak emerged from the shadows, voice low, almost contemplative. The test extends further than the field, Marshal. Even as we repel them, the seeds of doubt among our ranks may grow. Fear and suspicion travel faster than fire and cannon. The first casualty may not be a soldier, but loyalty itself. Cale's jaw tightened. He had already sensed it, the subtle hesitations, the minor deviations from protocol, the small tremors of unease that had begun to spread since the northern probe was detected. Immortality gave him perspective, but also an unyielding weight. He had seen empires crumble not solely because of their enemies, but because trust had failed first. "Deploy countermeasures," Kyle commanded. "Target the flanking skirmishers first. Hold the fortifications, but move reserves to shield potential breaches. And watch closely every officer who hesitates, every subordinate who falters. We must endure externally and internally, simultaneously. One cannot survive without the other." Solara nodded, issuing orders with precise authority. Troops moved into formation, reinforcing weak points, shifting reserves to anticipate enemy maneuvers. Turrets fired in controlled volleys, and orbital support unleashed bursts of energy that scorched enemy craft before they could reach effective range. The northern plateau became a theater of disciplined chaos, an orchestration of strategy and survival. Yet even amidst the clamor of battle, Cale's mind remained acutely aware of the subtle tensions within his own ranks. Lieutenant Arvin's movements were slightly delayed, an anomaly that Kyle noted immediately. A minor officer hesitated in issuing orders, only to be prompted by a whispered instruction from Morthane. Every deviation, every hesitation, every glimmer of doubt was recorded in Cale's mind. Immortality taught him that even small fractures left unchecked could become chasms. Torvak approached, leaning slightly over Cale's shoulder, eyes sweeping the battlefield. "Observe, Marshal. The enemy tests us not merely with firepower, but with precision. They probe for weakness, for hesitation, for fractures within the chain of command. And yet the greatest threat is internal. Fear, mistrust, and doubt. These are far more insidious than any projectile." Kyle's fingers brushed the edge of the railing. The battle raged, but his mind traced paths beyond the immediate carnage. The subtle looks exchanged between officers, the shifts in posture, the brief but telling pauses. The siege was not merely against the northern invaders. It was against the fragility of loyalty, the resilience of those who had pledged eternity to him. A sudden explosion rocked the southern flank, drawing Cale's attention. One of the reserve regiments had been struck by an unexpected maneuver, a feint executed with deadly precision. Cale's voice cut through the command spire with calm authority. "Redirect artillery fire, support the southern flank immediately, and observe the actions of the commanders there, who faltered, who hesitated, and who acted with resolve." Solara's eyes met his, understanding without words. The first real test of internal cohesion had begun. It was not enough to repel the enemy. The officers had to prove themselves as much as the soldiers. Every hesitation would echo in the eternal memory of Bastion Primaris, noted, measured, and weighed against the legacy of loyalty. The enemy's assault intensified. Skirmishers flanked, orbital bombardments struck, and the northern plateau shook under concentrated fire. Yet Cale Draven remained composed, orchestrating defenses with the precision of someone who had endured centuries of conflict. Every movement of his troops was calculated, yet every flicker of doubt among the ranks required vigilance, for it could unravel the entire defense in a single fatal misstep. Torvak's voice broke through the din, almost a whisper but commanding attention. "The enemy's strategy is unfolding as predicted. But note, some among your officers now hesitate. Morthane's gaze lingers too long on tactical maneuvers, questioning decisions. Arven wavers slightly, and subtle murmurs ripple through the lower ranks. The war is external, yes, but the true battle may well be within. Kyle's expression hardened. Then we correct it immediately. Every hesitation must be addressed, every doubt confronted, not with punishment, but with clarity of purpose and observation. We endure because we understand the balance of strength and loyalty, of fear and conviction. Hours passed. The northern plateau held, though at great cost. Casualties were noted, the wounded triaged with clinical efficiency, and officers were subtly corrected, their hesitations addressed through observation and careful command. The enemy withdrew temporarily, but Kale knew it was only a prelude. This assault had been a test, both of strategy and of internal cohesion. He turned to Solara and Torvak. We have survived, but the war continues. The enemy adapts, and so must we. And more importantly, the true challenge, loyalty, trust, and the endurance of the soul remains untested fully. We prepare not just for attacks, but for the subtle fractures that may yet betray us from within. The sky dimmed as another day fell over Bastion Primaris. Fires still burned, the horizon glimmered with distant energy signatures, and the fortress itself bore the marks of conflict. Marshal Cale Draven understood that survival was only the beginning. The siege would test the limits of courage, discipline, and loyalty alike, and the outcome would not be determined solely by weapons or walls, but by the hearts of those who had pledged eternity to its defense. The first external battle had been fought, and yet Cale knew the true war, the war of trust, betrayal, and internal fracture, had only just begun. The northern assault had ended, yet Bastion Primaris did not feel victory. The walls remained intact, the civilians still sheltered, but a gnawing unease pulsed through the command spire like a hidden storm. Marshal Kyle Draven moved through the corridors with deliberate pace, armor clanking softly, eyes scanning not only the soldiers around him, but the subtle tension that lingered behind their disciplined facades. Captain Solara Voss followed closely, her presence steady and reassuring. Yet even she could not disguise the strain that etched lines into her face. "Marshal," she began quietly, "even after the northern victory, murmurs persist. Officers exchange glances that should not exist, and small deviations from protocol continue to appear. Something, or someone, has infiltrated more than our outer defenses." Kyle's fingers pressed against the edge of the railing in the observation chamber. Centuries of command had taught him to detect subtle cracks before they widened, yet even he felt the weight of what lay ahead. "Then we uncover it," he said. "Every hesitation, every deviation, every whisper of dissent will be traced and accounted for. Immortality grants perspective, but it also demands vigilance, and I will not tolerate treachery within these walls." Torvak stepped from the shadows, robes brushing softly against the steel floor. "It is not always overt, Marshal," he said, voice calm, yet filled with a disquieting weight. "The most dangerous betrayal is silent, woven into the fabric of obedience. A glance held too long, a hesitation in command, a decision made in secrecy. These are the threads that can unravel entire legions without a shot being fired." Cale's eyes hardened. "Then we observe, carefully, and act only when certainty outweighs doubt. We cannot destroy loyalty in pursuit of it, nor ignore deception at the risk of ruin. This balance is what will define the survival of Bastion Primaris." The council convened in the war chamber, its walls etched with centuries of battle records. holographic displays flickering with the positions of troops and the remnants of the enemy's probe. Morthane stood, rigid, arms crossed, his expression taut with barely restrained frustration. Arvin lingered near the rear, posture stiff, eyes flicking subtly toward Kale before returning to the displays. Every officer carried their own weight, yet Kale could sense the subtle fractures among them, like tiny fissures threatening to widen under pressure. Reports indicate minor irregularities, Kale began, voice low, controlled. Some officers delayed implementing countermeasures during the northern assault. Others acted independently, without consultation. And still others whispered concerns that, while prudent, were expressed in ways that undermine cohesion. We cannot ignore this. Morthane's lips tightened. With respect, Marshal, battlefield decisions are rarely perfect. Hesitation does not equal betrayal. Every officer acted according to their understanding. Kale's gaze held him. Hesitation can be a symptom, yes, but when combined with secrecy, deviations from protocol, and subtle manipulation of facts, it becomes more than mere caution. It becomes a potential fracture in the chain of command, and fractures, if left unchecked, can destroy even the strongest fortress. Solara leaned forward, her voice steady. Marshal, the subtlety here is critical. We cannot accuse without proof, yet we cannot ignore patterns. The enemy may be exploiting divisions already present, or creating them. Our vigilance must extend beyond cannon and walls, into the hearts of those we trust most. Kyle nodded, turning to Torvak. Prepare observations. Track movements, decisions, and communications. Identify anomalies without revealing the purpose. We will uncover hesitation, and when the time comes, confront it with precision. Torvak inclined his head. It will be done, Marshal. Yet consider this. The awareness of observation alone can provoke actions we have not foreseen. The mind is the battlefield where loyalty and fear clash, and often the casualties are unseen until it is too late. The council dispersed, leaving Kyle and Solara alone in the chamber. Do you ever wonder, Kyle said quietly, if the enemy is not simply outside, but within? If the walls we build cannot contain betrayal, what then remains of Bastion Primaris? Solara's eyes met his, unwavering. Then we strengthen it, Marshal. Not only with steel and fire, but with vigilance, guidance, and the certainty that loyalty is worth fighting for. Even if the battle is within, even if the foe is subtle, we endure. That is what defines us. Kale's jaw tightened. Endurance, vigilance, loyalty. These were the pillars of survival. Yet the weight was endless. Centuries of war had shown him that betrayal often began as doubt, and doubt could spread faster than any enemy fire. He understood, as he always had, that even in victory, the seeds of ruin could be sown quietly, insidiously. Hours later, a subtle anomaly appeared in communications. A minor officer, tasked with relaying movement reports from the northern perimeter, had transmitted data inconsistent with both reconnaissance and battlefield observation. Kale's mind traced the implications. The deviation was slight, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate. A minor error or a first act of betrayal. Torvak's presence was beside him again. Observe, but do not accuse prematurely. The first step of betrayal is rarely evident. Watch the responses, note hesitation, and consider motivation. Even the most loyal may falter under pressure, but some will not recover, and those are the ones who will shape the outcome of this siege more than any enemy fleet. Kyle signaled for Solara to assemble the officers for immediate review. The minor discrepancies had to be addressed without causing panic or resentment. Every officer will explain their actions, Kyle said, not as an accusation, but as a record. Transparency is the first test of loyalty, and honesty is the shield against doubt. As the officers reported, patterns emerged. Hesitations, veiled objections, and subtle inconsistencies hinted at deeper uncertainties. Kyle noted each, filing them away, not as judgment, but as markers in a larger map of potential fracture points. Immortality allowed him to see long-term consequences, and he understood that the true test of Bastion Primaris was not merely the enemy at the gates, but the silent battles of trust, fear, and ambition that raged within. The night deepened. Fires burned across the northern plateau, and distant signals shimmered faintly in the haze. Bastion Primaris had survived the external assault, yet the subtle tremors within its heart suggested that the next act of betrayal might be closer than anyone suspected. Kale Draven understood this fully. The siege was not over, and survival demanded more than strategy. It demanded clarity of mind, resilience of spirit, and the unflinching resolve to confront both the enemy outside and the doubt inside. He turned to Solara and Torvak, voice quiet but resolute. Prepare for the next stage. Observe, anticipate, and be ready. Bastion Primaris endures not because it is impregnable, but because its leaders recognize the silent war within its walls. And the first true fracture may come tonight. The stars above glimmered faintly through the ash-laden skies, a reminder that even in eternity, darkness encroaches. But those who endure shape the light that remains. The dawn over Bastion Primaris was cold, pale, and indifferent, casting long shadows across shattered ramparts and scorched earth. The northern plateau had been stabilized, yet the silence was not peace. It was a harbinger. Within the command spire, Marshal Kale Draven moved with the inexorable weight of centuries, aware that vigilance alone could not mend the fractures growing among his officers. Reports of anomalies had multiplied overnight. Minor deviations in troop deployment, subtle delays in executing orders, and whispered conversations that evaporated the moment he entered a chamber, all pointed toward an insidious internal threat. Kyle's eyes, hardened by immortal experience, scanned the hololithic displays, noting every discrepancy with meticulous precision. Captain Solara Voss approached, her armor streaked with soot and sweat. "Marshal," she said, voice low, "we have identified a cluster of inconsistencies in the eastern garrison. Several officers ignored orders during last night's perimeter sweep. They claim miscommunication, but patterns suggest otherwise." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Patterns do not lie," he said, voice steady but cold. "The enemy may exploit hesitation, but true fractures emerge when doubt festers unchecked. We must confront this before it spreads further." Torvak's shadow detached itself from the corner of the chamber. "Do not mistake caution for inaction, Marshal. Every confrontation risks inflaming fear, and fear can be more destructive than betrayal itself. Observe first, discern truth second, act only when certainty outweighs risk." Kale's gaze swept over the assembled officers. Morthane's expression was taut, unreadable. Lieutenant Arvin lingered near the rear, avoiding direct eye contact, and several minor officers exchanged subtle glances that spoke volumes. Trust, Kale realized, was a fragile thing, even among those who had pledged eternity to the walls of Bastion Primaris. "Gather the officers," Kyle commanded. "We will review last night's actions, not as accusation, but as demonstration. Each will explain decisions, each will recount observations, each will reveal intent. Transparency is the first shield against betrayal." The council assembled. The chamber was silent, save for the hum of energy panels and the distant echoes of artillery fire beyond the walls. Kyle studied each officer in turn, searching for signs of fear, hesitation, or hidden motives. The weight of centuries pressed against him, an invisible burden that he alone could bear fully. First, Lieutenant Arvin spoke. His voice was controlled, but trembled subtly under Cale's scrutiny. Marshal, the deviation was an attempt to prevent unnecessary civilian exposure. Orders were unclear under sudden enemy maneuvers, and I acted to minimize risk. Kyle's eyes, unyielding, measured the truth behind the words. Intent does not erase consequence, Lieutenant, yet your transparency is noted. Continue. Other officers followed, explanations flowing, some precise, others vague, some edged with subtle justification or deflection. Kyle catalogued each, noting inconsistencies, hesitation, and contradictions. The external battle had been survived, yet the internal one was now plain. Every omission, every unspoken doubt, every whispered concern formed a lattice of potential fracture points that could unravel Bastion Primaris from within. Torvak's voice was almost a whisper, yet it carried through Cale's mind like a chisel against stone. Observe not only what is said, Marshal, but what is unsaid. Loyalty is revealed as much in silence as in speech. Hesitation is often a precursor to action or betrayal. The first tremor may be imperceptible, yet its echo can be catastrophic. Kyle inclined his head, acknowledging the weight of the observation. Immortality had shown him the truth. The enemy rarely destroyed walls directly. They broke hearts, corrupted minds, and allowed suspicion to spread like wildfire. Bastion Primaris would not fall by cannon fire alone. It would fall by fracture, subtle, internal, and nearly invisible. A sudden alert drew Cale's attention to the northern plateau. The enemy fleet had reformed, moving in tighter formations, probing weak points with surgical precision. Artillery and energy turrets responded, but the attacks were now accompanied by subtle feints that suggested someone on the inside had relayed knowledge of the fortress's internal layout. Solara's voice was tight with urgency. Marshal, these maneuvers indicate more than external reconnaissance. Someone has provided intelligence, and the pattern aligns with the internal discrepancies we reviewed. This is not mere coincidence, it is orchestration. Cale's gaze hardened, sharp and unyielding. Then we act, but with precision. Identify the source without destroying morale. Loyalty must be tested yet preserved if genuine. We are immortal, yes, but even eternity is fragile when trust is broken. Orders were issued. Reconnaissance units moved covertly through the eastern and northern sectors, observing officers, soldiers, and communications alike. Every signal, every hesitation, every unexplained deviation was noted and cross-referenced. The enemy probed, but Kyle knew the greatest danger had already entered his fortress: the slow erosion of trust. Hours later, an officer of moderate rank, previously considered loyal, hesitated during a command sequence, following the exact instructions of the enemy probe without question. Kyle noted it immediately, the realization cutting through him like a blade sharpened over centuries. Betrayal had begun to manifest openly, subtle though it was, and the consequences could be devastating. Torvak's voice was calm but ominous. Observe the ripple, Marshal. One falter may provoke another. Trust, once broken, is difficult to restore. And the enemy has learned well, the internal fractures will weaken you faster than any external assault ever could. Kyle's eyes scanned the assembled council once more. We will confront this, but not recklessly. Precision is essential. Loyalty must be reaffirmed, hesitation corrected, and betrayal exposed. The survival of Bastion Primaris depends not only on walls and firepower, but on the cohesion of hearts that dwell within these walls. Solara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Marshal, you carry this burden as you always have. Bastion Primaris endures because of your vigilance, and now that vigilance must extend deeper into hearts and minds that may yet be swayed. Kyle nodded slowly, the weight of centuries settling into resolve. The enemy had tested them externally, yet the siege's true challenge was only beginning. Trust would be broken, loyalties tested, and the first acts of betrayal, subtle though they might be, would shape the destiny of Bastion Primaris more than any volley of plasma or cannon blast. As the day wore on, Cale Draven understood that the fortress was not merely stone and metal. It was a crucible of faith, endurance, and morality, and the war for its survival had moved beyond the battlefield into the quiet, unseen fractures of loyalty and doubt, where the consequences would echo far longer than the sound of any gun. The skies above Bastion Primaris were heavy with ash and smoke, a haze that dimmed even the faint glimmer of distant stars. The northern plateau had stabilized temporarily, but the quiet was deceptive, a fragile veil over fractures that had begun to spread like veins beneath stone. Marshal Cale Draven moved through the corridors, with the inexorable weight of centuries pressing upon him. The siege was no longer merely a war of cannons and fire. It was a war of trust, subtle and relentless, and the first tremors of betrayal were beginning to manifest openly. Captain Solara Voss approached, her armor streaked with soot and exhaustion. "Marshal," she said quietly, "reports indicate that discrepancies among the eastern garrison persist. Several minor officers have delayed communications, and some have withheld critical information. The patterns align with enemy probes and previous internal inconsistencies." Kyle's eyes narrowed. Centuries of experience had taught him that betrayal was rarely overt at first. It was hidden in hesitation, in incomplete reports, in the silence between words. "Then we must confront it," he said, voice low but commanding. "We do so with precision. Observation alone is insufficient now. The first acts of deliberate betrayal cannot be ignored." Torvak emerged from the shadows, robes brushing softly against the steel floor. "Even subtle fractures can become catastrophic, Marshal. The mind is often a more dangerous battlefield than any plateau. The enemy seeks to exploit these fractures, to magnify hesitation into failure. You must act carefully, lest loyalty be destroyed in the process." Kyle inclined his head. Observation first, confrontation second. But readiness must remain absolute. Every officer, every subordinate, every signal must be scrutinized. Even minor anomalies may hold the seeds of ruin. A sudden alert drew their attention to the northern plateau. The enemy fleet had returned in greater force, testing the walls with new formations designed to probe defenses while minimizing exposure. Plasma streaked across the sky, and artillery erupted in precise, disciplined response. Yet Kyle's eyes were drawn not to the enemy ships, but to the officers coordinating the defense. Subtle hesitations, delayed orders, and unconfirmed signals all suggested that the enemy had succeeded in exploiting internal weaknesses. Solara's voice was tight with concern. "Marshal, the northern defense is holding, but coordination falters at several points. Some officers executed orders incorrectly. Others repeated enemy-reported information without verification. This suggests internal collusion, or at the very least, manipulation." Kyle's jaw tightened. Immortality had granted him foresight, Yet the erosion of trust was an enemy that could not be defeated with firepower alone. Then we confront these fractures quietly. Precision, not public admonishment, is required. Those who are loyal will understand the necessity. Those who are compromised will reveal themselves under scrutiny. Morthane, ever rigid, stepped forward. With respect, Marshal, observation alone may be too slow. If the enemy knows of internal fractures, they will exploit them immediately. We must act decisively, or risk catastrophic breach. Kyle's gaze was unflinching. And yet, too harsh a response risks destroying the loyalty we still possess. We cannot act solely on suspicion. Proof is required. Subtlety is required. And above all, clarity of intent must be maintained. The walls may hold, but the fortress is in the hearts of those who defend it. Torvak's eyes glimmered. Even the most disciplined minds can falter under pressure, Marshal. Fear is a subtle corrupter, and sometimes the first betrayal is not conscious. The subconscious can act in ways that seem deliberate, yet are merely reflection of doubt or exhaustion. Observe not only actions, but the intent behind them. Orders were issued. Reconnaissance units moved silently through the eastern and northern sectors, tracing communications, observing reactions, and monitoring decisions. Every anomaly, every hesitation, and every unexplained deviation was recorded. The enemy continued to probe, but Kyle knew the true threat was not just outside, it was within. Hours later, the first unmistakable act of internal betrayal occurred. A minor officer redirected a patrol away from a critical junction, citing a false report of enemy movement. The result, a temporary gap in the northern defenses, covered only by quick improvisation from adjacent units. Kyle's eyes narrowed as the implications settled over him. This was deliberate, not hesitation. The first overt fracture had manifested. Solara approached, her expression taut. Marshal, the deviation was corrected without loss, but the intent was clear. Someone has chosen self-interest or collusion over loyalty, and this cannot go unaddressed. Kyle's voice was calm, but carried the weight of centuries. Then we isolate the actor, investigate motivations, and prepare for confrontation. Loyalty must be reaffirmed, hesitation corrected, and betrayal exposed. The fortress survives not by walls alone, but by cohesion, trust, and discipline. And those who falter deliberately threaten all of it. Torvak's whisper carried the inevitability of consequence. Observe reactions, Marshal. One act of betrayal may provoke others. Patterns will emerge. The war within often escalates faster than the war without. Kyle turned back to the battlefield. The enemy fleet probed again, but the true siege was invisible to most. The subtle testing of loyalty, the quiet assessment of intent, and the first tremors of fear and ambition within the council. He understood fully that survival demanded both strategic genius and psychological acuity. Hours bled into night. Bastion Primaris endured, walls intact, civilians largely unharmed. Yet the internal tension had reached a critical point. Every glance, every hesitation, every unspoken doubt among the officers now carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Kyle knew that loyalty, once fractured, was far more difficult to repair than walls or weapon emplacements. He turned to Solara and Torvak, voice measured, carrying authority over the still-burning horizon. Prepare for the next stage. Observation continues, but confrontation is imminent. The first fracture has become a test, and the results will determine not only the survival of Bastion Primaris, but the integrity of those who defend it. Trust must be measured, loyalty reaffirmed, and hesitation eradicated. The stars above, dim through ash and smoke, reflected faintly in the viewport. Kyle Draven understood that Bastion Primaris would not be defeated by cannons or fleets alone. The war for survival had moved inward, into the hearts and minds of those who had pledged eternity to the fortress, and the first act of betrayal had already begun to reshape the destiny of all who remained. The northern plateau remained scarred from the recent skirmishes, its blackened soil and shattered barricades reflecting the relentless cruelty of war. Bastion Primaris had endured the assault, yet the fortress no longer felt whole. Within the labyrinthine corridors of the command spire, the air was thick with tension, a suffocating weight that pressed against the hearts of every officer, soldier, and advisor. Marshal Kyle Draven walked among them like a shadow of inevitability, immortal and unyielding. Aware that the true siege now raged not in the open battlefield, but in the very souls of those who had pledged eternity to his command. Captain Solara Voss moved beside him, her expression taut and unreadable. "Marshal," she said softly, "patterns of internal deviation have grown more complex. Minor officers now coordinate among themselves in ways that circumvent reporting chains. It is subtle, yet deliberate. The first act of betrayal was not an isolated incident. It has become a network, a whispering undercurrent that may be shaping loyalty to its own design." Kale's eyes narrowed. Immortality had allowed him to see countless empires rise and fall, and each time the lesson had been identical. The greatest enemy was rarely the one visible in the sky. "Then we expose it carefully," he said. "Not with accusation, but with orchestration. Those who are loyal will reveal themselves under scrutiny. Those who are compromised will show their true intent." Torvak's shadow detached itself from the corridor wall, his voice calm, almost contemplative. "Marshal, observe closely. Betrayal is a subtle thing. It grows like a parasite in silence. One act often begets another. Alliances form in whispers, and intentions that seem hidden always cast a shadow. You must detect it before it spreads beyond containment." Kyle inclined his head. "Prepare the observation grids. Every communication, every movement, every unspoken exchange is to be noted. Even those who appear steadfast may falter if they sense doubt in their peers. And this is precisely the field upon which we fight. Not only the enemy outside, but the fractures within." The council convened once more, the chamber dimly lit by flickering hololithic panels displaying the northern and eastern sectors. Morthane's posture remained rigid, yet Kale could detect subtle unease in the way he shifted weight, the slight hesitation before issuing directives. Lieutenant Arvin avoided eye contact entirely, while other minor officers exchanged glances that were brief but charged with unspoken understanding. "Reports indicate coordination anomalies," Kyle began, voice low but commanding. "And I am aware that some officers have chosen paths that circumvent orders. This is not accusation. This is observation. Transparency is demanded of all. We must uncover intent before it undermines the fortress." The first officer spoke cautiously. "Marshal, the deviations were made in response to perceived immediate threats. We acted to protect key sectors and civilians." Kale's gaze did not waver. "Intent does not erase consequence, yet your transparency is noted. Continue. We must understand fully the network of decisions and alliances forming within Bastion Primaris." As the officers spoke, patterns began to emerge. Minor alliances had formed, subtle in their design, operating under the guise of loyalty while quietly shifting power and influence. Some officers had begun to prioritize self-preservation or ambition over collective defense. The external assault had been repelled, yet the fortress's cohesion, its true strength, was showing cracks. Torvak's voice, calm and low, carried the weight of inevitability. Observe not only actions, but interactions. Whispers, glances, hesitation, and unsanctioned coordination. These reveal intent. The enemy may exploit these fractures without even touching the walls. Loyalty is tested more ruthlessly than any rampart. Kyle's jaw tightened. He had observed similar patterns in wars long past. Internal alliances formed quietly, ambition entwined with fear, hesitation turning into defiance. The first overt betrayal had now spawned subtler ripples of distrust, and he understood that each of these fractures, if unaddressed, could compromise the fortress entirely. Deploy targeted observation teams, Kyle commanded. Focus on both communication channels and personal interactions. Every deviation, however minor, must be recorded. We will create a map of intent and alliance before the fractures become too large to contain. Solara's voice was measured. Marshal, the first overt act of betrayal has already been noted. If these alliances continue unchecked, we may face simultaneous internal collapse alongside enemy assaults. Preparation is critical. Kyle inclined his head. Then we prepare. But action must be surgical, precise, and deliberate. Loyalty must be affirmed through clarity and confrontation. Hesitation corrected through observation and correction. And betrayal exposed with proof that leaves no ambiguity. Hours passed, and subtle revelations began to crystallize. Officers previously deemed loyal were observed exchanging unrecorded communications with external agents. Hesitations, minor though they were, compounded into patterns that suggested orchestrated divergence from protocol. Kyle noted each instance, filing them mentally like points on a lattice of potential fracture. Finally, Morthane approached Kyle privately, his expression taut. Marshal, if these alliances are deliberate, the fortress may not endure another external assault. The first fracture is growing, and more may follow if we hesitate. Kyle's eyes met his, unflinching. Then we act when certainty outweighs doubt. Observation will continue, but confrontation is inevitable. The first ripple of betrayal has become a wave, and the survival of Bastion Primaris now depends on detecting its currents before they consume us entirely. Outside the spire, the northern sky glimmered faintly with distant energy flares. The enemy probing for weaknesses. Inside, Bastion Primaris was equally threatened by forces unseen. Whispered alliances, unspoken intentions, and subtle fractures in trust that now threatened to spread unchecked. The first seeds of betrayal had taken root, and Kale Draven understood that the coming days would demand all his experience, all his wisdom, and the unflinching resolve of someone who had witnessed centuries of empires rise and crumble. Bastion Primaris had survived assaults of fire and plasma. Now it would face the trial of hearts, minds, and allegiance, and the first true fracture within its walls had begun to shape its destiny. The northern plateau quivered under the renewed assault, plasma and ion fire igniting clouds of ash that drifted like smoke through a sky, long since stripped of stars. Bastion Primaris had endured countless sieges, yet each assault felt heavier than the last, not merely in force, but in implication. Marshal Kale Draven stood atop the observation spire, armored hands gripping the railing, as centuries of instinct weighed every movement of the enemy fleet, every twitch among his officers, every subtle hesitation in those who commanded the walls. Marshal, Captain Solara Voss said, stepping up beside him, her armor scratched by fragments of falling debris. External assaults are coordinated with internal anomalies. It is no longer mere coincidence. Someone within Bastion Primaris is actively assisting the enemy, feeding them data, timing their strikes. Kyle's gaze sharpened. He had foreseen fractures, observed hesitation, and traced the subtle ripples of disloyalty. Yet to see them manifest so clearly, aligned with the enemy's assault, was a chilling confirmation. "Then we must act decisively," he said. "Observation alone will no longer suffice. The enemy seeks to collapse us from within. We must expose the fractures while defending the walls and prevent contagion from spreading further." Torvak appeared at the edge of the balcony, eyes dark and thoughtful. "Even now, Marshal, subtlety is paramount. The moment of confrontation must not destroy what remains of loyalty. One misstep, and the fortress may crumble under suspicion, fear, and indecision." Kyle nodded, turning back to the viewport. The northern defenses were under relentless pressure. Turrets fired in controlled, disciplined volleys. Orbital cannons flared against enemy formations, and ground regiments moved with precision despite the chaos. Yet within the ranks, Kyle observed hesitation and deviation, subtle signals that whispered of collusion, of divided hearts. "Deploy targeted observation teams to every sector," Kyle commanded. "Trace every decision, record every communication, and identify the source of leaks. Loyalty must be reaffirmed, hesitation corrected, betrayal exposed. Survival now demands both vigilance and discernment, externally and internally." Minutes later, reconnaissance reported a critical anomaly. Lieutenant Arvin had redirected forces from the eastern flank without consulting his superior officers, justifying the action with fabricated enemy positions. The redirection had nearly allowed a breach of Bastion Primaris' outer defenses, a gap covered only by immediate improvisation. Kyle's expression was cold, unyielding. The first overt act of betrayal had now evolved into coordinated internal manipulation. Solara's voice was taut. "Marshal, this is not hesitation. This is deliberate action. And it may be the opening of a network. Others may follow or already be following. The internal threat is now active." Kale's jaw tightened. "Then confrontation is necessary. Prepare for isolated surgical exposure of those who act in betrayal. We will maintain order, yet ensure that every deviation is noted, every act accounted for, and every intent revealed." Torvak's whisper carried a weight that cut through the chaos. "Observe the ripple. One revealed betrayal may provoke another. The first fracture is seldom isolated. Loyalties are tested not only by orders, but by fear, ambition, and self-preservation. Watch carefully, Marshal, for the web may be more intricate than even you foresee." Kyle signaled Solara to convene the council in the war chamber, the corridors thick with smoke and tension. Officers filed in, some with hesitancy, others with unspoken defiance, aware that the fortress's heart now carried a silent battlefield of trust and fear. Kyle's gaze swept the room, noting subtle exchanges, quick glances, and the faint tightening of grips on armor. Every movement was catalogued, every intention analyzed, every deviation scrutinized. "Lieutenant Arvin," Kyle said, voice calm but commanding, "explain your decision to redirect the eastern flank without consultation. Transparency is demanded, and your response will be observed carefully. This is not accusation. It is opportunity for clarity and reaffirmation of loyalty." Arvin's eyes flickered, a shadow of hesitation passing over his expression. "Marshal, I acted to prevent unnecessary exposure of troops to enemy fire. Orders were ambiguous, and I—" His voice faltered, and Kyle noted the subtle signs of deliberate obfuscation. Hesitation had become manipulation. Morthane's lips tightened. Intent is not enough, Marshal. Actions have consequences. Even minor deception may yield catastrophe when aligned with enemy intelligence. Kyle's eyes did not waver, and those consequences will be accounted for. Observation continues. Loyalty must be proven not only through words, but through consistent actions. Deception, hesitation, or hidden intent will not be tolerated. Outside, the northern sky flared with enemy fire, yet the most dangerous breaches were now invisible. Subtle alliances among minor officers had formed, whispers and covert decisions shaping the fortress from within, guiding enemy probes and exploiting hesitation. The external assault was brutal, but the internal fractures were lethal. Kyle's gaze swept the council again. We will maintain the defense, yet every act, every omission, every deviation must be scrutinized. Trust, once broken, is far harder to repair than walls or ramparts. The survival of Bastion Primaris now hinges on exposing betrayal without destroying the cohesion that remains. Solara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Marshal, you have carried this burden across centuries. Even now, your vigilance shapes every decision. We endure because of your awareness. And now, that vigilance must extend to hearts and minds more than walls and weapons. Hours passed. Bastion Primaris survived the external assault, its ramparts intact, the enemy repelled temporarily. Yet the internal war had reached a fever pitch. Hesitation, subtle deviation, and overt acts of betrayal now intersected with the chaos outside, creating a crucible of moral, psychological, and strategic tension. Kael Draven understood fully. The fortress was not merely a bastion of steel. It was a crucible of loyalty, trust, and the endurance of the immortal spirit. The stars, dimmed by ash, flickered faintly above, as though observing silently. Bastion Primaris had survived the storm of fire, but the siege of hearts and minds was only beginning. The first overt fracture had grown, and the next moves, both external and internal, would determine the destiny of the fortress and the immortal souls sworn to defend it. The northern sky burned with the orange flare of distant suns, fading and flickering through the pall of ash and smoke. Bastion Primaris had endured, yet every heartbeat of the fortress seemed tense with anticipation, as though the walls themselves whispered warnings of unseen fractures. Marshal Kael Draven moved through the command spire with deliberate steps, his immortal presence a shadow over officers whose loyalty now wavered under pressure. The first overt betrayal had blossomed into a network of covert alliances, and the enemy outside tested each crack with merciless precision. "Marshal," Captain Solara Voss said, her voice taut with urgency. "The internal network has expanded. Signals intercepted from the eastern garrison suggest coordinated sabotage. Minor officers are directing resources contrary to orders, and reconnaissance confirms enemy probes are exploiting these deviations. The first fracture is now a breach." Kyle's eyes narrowed, unblinking. Centuries had taught him that the true collapse of empires was rarely from the outside. It began in the hearts of those who defended them. "Then we expose it, decisively," he said. "Observation is no longer sufficient. The network must be dismantled, loyalties tested, and hesitation corrected through confrontation. We will not survive if fear or ambition dictates action over duty." Torvak's shadow detached itself from the chamber wall, his voice calm, carrying the weight of inevitable consequence. "The revelation will provoke reaction, Marshal. Some will resist, some will falter, and others may act openly in defiance. The crucible has been lit, and only those proven by fire will endure. Yet even exposure risks destroying what remains of cohesion. Precision is paramount. Kyle's jaw tightened. We act with clarity. Those loyal will see the necessity. Those compromised will reveal themselves through choices. The fortress cannot endure indecision or ambiguity. The council convened in the war chamber. Hololithic displays flickered, mapping both external enemy movements and internal communications. Morthane stood rigid, his expression taut, yet Kyle could detect subtle tension in his posture. Lieutenant Arvin lingered near the rear, avoidance evident in every subtle motion, while minor officers exchanged glances that were no longer casual. They were coded, deliberate, and laden with hidden intent. "Lieutenant Arvin," Kyle said, his voice calm but resonant, "your actions in the eastern flank have been traced and verified against reconnaissance. You diverted forces and withheld critical information. Explain your intent." Arvin's eyes darted briefly toward his peers before meeting Kale's gaze, defiance flickering behind a mask of controlled composure. "Marshal, I acted to prevent unnecessary casualties and to mitigate risk. Orders were unclear in the chaos of the previous assault." Kale's expression remained impassive. Intent cannot erase consequence. The deviations have created vulnerabilities, and evidence suggests coordination with external probes. This is no longer hypothetical. Loyalty must be demonstrated by transparency and action, not explanation alone. Morthane stepped forward, voice taut. "Marshal, confronting one officer will not suffice. The network is extensive. Hesitation or indecision now will embolden others and compromise the fortress entirely." Kyle's gaze swept the council, piercing through the shadows of doubt and fear. "Then we expose the network methodically. Surveillance has identified key nodes. Each will be confronted, and actions will be accounted for. Loyalty must be reaffirmed under scrutiny, hesitation corrected, and betrayal revealed through evidence that cannot be denied." Torvak's presence, silent yet weighty, added a quiet emphasis. The first overt fracture has provoked reaction. Others will act in response. The crucible has begun. Observe how each responds. Those who falter reveal intent. Those who resist reveal alignment. And those who act decisively reveal loyalty. The first confrontation spread rapidly. Minor officers, identified as nodes in the network, were called before Kale. Each was asked to recount decisions, communications, and actions during the northern and eastern defenses. Some faltered, their explanations inconsistent, their hesitation betraying intent. Others displayed calm, transparent reasoning, reinforcing loyalty and demonstrating discernment under pressure. Meanwhile, the enemy outside pressed harder. Orbital bombardments flared, testing both the walls and the defenders. Bastion Primaris responded with disciplined precision, yet the internal fractures amplified the stakes. Even minor delays or missteps could create openings that the enemy fleet would exploit ruthlessly. Kyle's voice, steady and commanding, filled the chamber. "Every act of deviation, every omission, every hesitation is recorded. Transparency is demanded, and loyalty must be demonstrated not merely by words, but by consistent, verifiable action. The survival of Bastion Primaris depends on clarity, integrity, and courage." Hours passed in tense deliberation and observation. The network of internal betrayal was partially dismantled as key nodes were confronted and their intentions clarified. Some revealed self-preservation, others ambition, and a few outright collusion with the enemy. Each act of exposure created ripples. Hesitation hardened into defiance. Loyalty was questioned, and subtle alliances fractured under scrutiny. Solara's voice, quiet yet resolute, cut through the tense air. Marshal, the network is exposed, yet some fractures remain. Even as we defend the walls, loyalty must be tested continuously. The next enemy maneuver may coincide with these internal fractures, amplifying their impact. Kale's jaw tightened, the weight of centuries pressing against him. Immortality had granted him perspective, yet the cost of observing betrayal, of testing loyalty, of confronting hesitation, was a burden heavier than any assault endured on the northern plateau. He understood fully that survival required both the fortification of walls and the fortification of trust. The northern sky flared once more, the enemy probing with precision. Within, Bastion Primaris defenders had been tested as never before. Loyalty had been affirmed in some hearts, revealed as compromised in others, and hesitation corrected through exposure. The crucible had begun, and the first fractures had been illuminated, but the siege was far from over. Kyle turned to Solara and Torvak, voice quiet but resolute. Prepare for the next stage. External assaults will intensify, and the internal war will continue. The fortress survives not by cannon alone, but by clarity, integrity, and unflinching vigilance. We endure because of those who are proven by fire, and the first fractures have now shown who they are. Bastion Primaris remained standing, its walls battered yet intact. But the true war, the war for loyalty, trust, and moral integrity, was only beginning. And Kael Draven, immortal and unyielding, knew that the coming hours would demand choices that would shape the destiny of the fortress and all who defended it, perhaps with irrevocable cost. The northern horizon burned with a searing red glow as the enemy fleet advanced, their lines precise and merciless, like blades drawn across the fragile canvas of Bastion Primaris. The air vibrated with the resonance of orbital bombardments and the distant, rhythmic thrum of artillery. Every flare, every explosion, every trembling shockwave was a reminder of the relentless external pressure pressing against the fortress. Yet within, the siege had taken on a far more insidious character. Betrayal, hesitation, and moral ambiguity had reached a tipping point. Marshal Kael Draven moved through the command spire, armored hands gripping railings, eyes scanning not only the external battlefield, but the faces of his officers. The first fractures had been exposed, networks of subtle collusion disrupted, yet the consequences of these revelations were only now beginning to manifest. Trust was fragile. Some officers, once steadfast, now trembled under scrutiny, while others hardened into silent, determined loyalty. The crucible of the fortress had tested every heart. Captain Solara Voss approached, her armor streaked with soot and burn marks, a quiet testament to hours of unrelenting pressure. "Marshal," she said, voice taut, "the eastern and northern flanks remain under heavy assault, yet the internal fractures have not fully resolved. Several officers are resistant to reaffirming loyalty, and some act with deliberate hesitation. The enemy may exploit this." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Then we confront it decisively. Hesitation is a weapon in enemy hands. Those who falter, those who deceive, must be faced with the consequences of their choice. We do not act with vengeance, but with clarity, and the truth will be revealed through the crucible of action." Torvak's shadow emerged, calm yet imposing. "Marshal, the first fractures have illuminated intent. Now, the heart of the siege lies not in walls or weapons, but in decisions. Loyalty, betrayal, courage, and ambition are laid bare. Observe, for action will provoke reaction, and the consequences are profound." The war chamber was assembled, officers now facing Kael with the weight of scrutiny pressing against them. Morthane's expression was taut, lips drawn thin, and Lieutenant Arvin shifted uneasily. Minor officers, previously operating under whispered alliances, now sat in rigid attention. Every face reflected the gravity of the moment. The first fractures had become open confrontation. Kyle's voice was calm, unyielding. The fortress has survived countless external assaults, yet the greatest threat has always been internal. Hesitation, doubt, and deliberate subversion. The network of deviations has been exposed, yet some fractures remain. Now, every action, every decision, every choice will be accounted for. Loyalty must be demonstrated, hesitation corrected, and betrayal resolved. Solara stepped forward, presenting evidence compiled from reconnaissance, intercepted communications, altered patrol logs, and the subtle coordination of minor officers acting in secret. Marshal, the evidence is conclusive. Those who faltered or colluded have been identified. The question now is not who is guilty, but how they choose to respond when confronted. Kyle's gaze swept the chamber, sharp and unwavering. Every officer will face the consequences of choice. Loyalty is not proven through words alone, but through decisive, verifiable action. Those who act with hesitation or deceit place the fortress at risk, and their decisions will be weighed against the survival of all. The first confrontation began. Lieutenant Arvin, who had redirected forces from the eastern flank, was called forward. His eyes flickered with uncertainty and defiance. "Marshal," he began, "I acted to protect lives. The orders were unclear, and I chose to act in the interest of minimizing casualties." Kyle's voice cut through the tension, measured and resolute. "Intent does not erase consequence. Your decisions have created openings exploited by the enemy. The first fractures have grown into a network. Your loyalty must now be proven through action, not explanation." Arvin hesitated, then nodded slowly, understanding that survival demanded more than rhetoric. He moved to rectify previous deviations, restoring critical sectors under Kale's watchful eyes. Other officers followed, each forced to confront choices, reassess loyalties, and demonstrate courage under scrutiny. Hesitation was corrected, betrayal was exposed. The crucible had revealed intent. Outside, the northern plateau trembled under the enemy's relentless assault. Bastion Primaris walls held, but the internal war, waged quietly, invisibly, yet with equal devastation, reached its climax. Subtle alliances broke, self-interest was revealed, and courage was measured not by weaponry, but by the heart. Torvak's voice, calm yet haunting, broke the silence. "Observe, Marshal. The first fractures have become open confrontation, and in the reflection of fear, ambition, and loyalty, the true character of the fortress is revealed. Decisions made now will echo far beyond the battlefield, shaping the fate of every soul sworn to its defense." Kale's jaw tightened, aware that survival demanded both external defense and moral clarity. Prepare all units for renewed assault. Every deviation corrected, every hesitation addressed. The fortress survives not only through cannon and artillery, but through clarity, courage, and unwavering loyalty. The first fractures have been illuminated. Now, the final test begins. As the enemy fleet pressed harder, orbital bombardments and plasma volleys lighting the sky in deadly rhythm, the internal battle reached its zenith. Officers previously hesitant now acted decisively. Minor deviations were corrected, and loyalty reaffirmed under pressure. Yet the cost was visible in every tense expression, every silent glance, and every faint tremor in those who had been forced to confront their own moral ambiguity. Kyle turned to Solara and Torvak. Voice low but resolute, "The fortress endures because of the courage proven in the crucible. Yet we must remain vigilant. External assaults will continue, but the internal war, the confrontation of hearts, minds, and intent, has reached its climax. Decisions made now will shape the survival of Bastion Primaris and the integrity of those who defend it. The northern sky burned, distant flares reflecting against the ash-filled horizon. Bastion Primaris had survived the external storm and endured the internal crucible. Fractures had been exposed, loyalty reaffirmed, and hesitation corrected through confrontation. Yet the cost was visible, heavy in the hearts of those who had faced the moral and strategic test. Kael Draven understood, with immortal clarity, that survival was never absolute. The fortress had been tested by fire and betrayal, and those who endured had done so through courage, clarity, and the unflinching resolution of the human and immortal spirit. The coming hours would decide the final consequences, but the first true resolution of the siege, internal and external, had now begun. The ash-laden winds of Bastion Primaris whispered through shattered streets and fractured ramparts, carrying the faint scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. The siege was over, though the scars it left were indelible, not merely upon stone and steel, but upon hearts, minds, and immortal souls. Marshal Kael Draven stood atop the central spire, his eyes scanning the horizon where the last enemy vessels had retreated, their flares fading into the dying glow of distant suns. Victory had been claimed, but at a cost measured not in lives alone, but in the erosion of trust and the moral weight borne by those who had survived. Captain Solara Voss approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the steel floor, armor scratched and scarred. "Marshal," she said, voice subdued, "the external assault has ended, yet the internal fractures remain as a reminder of what has been endured. Loyalty has been tested, betrayal exposed, and hesitation corrected. But the cost has been immense." Kyle's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Centuries of survival had taught him that triumph was rarely absolute, that the end of conflict always carried shadows of compromise and sorrow. "Survival alone is insufficient," he said, voice measured. "The fortress endures, yet we are forever altered. Those who faltered, those who deceived, and those who hesitated bear their own consequences. And those who endured must carry the weight of memory and vigilance for as long as Bastion Primaris stands." Torvak's presence, calm and shadowed, joined him on the spire. "Marshal, the crucible has ended, yet reflection is the true trial. Immortality grants perspective, yet the burden of observing betrayal, testing loyalty, and enforcing consequence is a weight heavier than any siege. Even victory is tempered with loss." Kyle inclined his head. "We are survivors, not conquerors. The fortress endures, but only because clarity, courage, and unyielding vigilance have prevailed where hesitation and deceit once threatened collapse. The cost is etched into every wall, every scar, every memory of those who fought within." Below, the defenders of Bastion Primaris moved through the aftermath, repairing walls, tending the wounded, and quietly mourning those lost or broken by the siege. The network of betrayal had been dismantled, but the human cost was palpable. Officers previously untested had proven themselves in the crucible. Some had faltered irreparably, while others emerged tempered, their loyalty irrevocable yet forever shadowed by the trials endured. Solara's eyes met Kyle's, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. The fortress is intact, yet some hearts may never fully heal. The first fractures, the hesitation, the betrayal, these will remain in memory, shaping every decision henceforth. Kale's jaw tightened, the weight of centuries pressing against him. Memory is the most enduring wall. We build with stone and steel, but we endure with awareness, judgment, and the wisdom to observe what is unseen. Those who survived the crucible will bear this knowledge as both shield and burden. Even immortality is not immune to reflection and consequence. Torvak's voice was low, almost contemplative. The first fractures illuminated intent, Marshal. The crucible revealed courage, hesitation, and betrayal alike. Yet even in resolution, the shadow remains, a reminder that vigilance, clarity, and discernment are eternal, and that even the strongest fortress may falter when the human and immortal spirit is tested. Kyle turned from the horizon to face the council and surviving officers gathered below. You have endured both the siege of Bastion Primaris and the crucible of conscience, he said, voice carrying to all who listened. Those who faltered have been exposed. Those who acted with loyalty have been proven. The fortress survives not solely by walls, weapons, or firepower, but through integrity, vigilance, and courage under scrutiny. Let this be remembered. Let this be the legacy of all who defend Bastion Primaris. Silence fell for a long moment, broken only by the faint creak of steel and the distant settling of debris. Some officers bowed their heads in reflection. Others stood rigid, absorbing the weight of both survival and moral reckoning. Even immortals, who had walked through centuries and watched empires rise and crumble, could not avoid the gravity of the consequences revealed. Kyle's gaze drifted once more toward the horizon, where the last light of distant suns faded into the void. Bastion Primaris has endured the siege, yet the cost is eternal, he said quietly. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. Lives lost cannot be restored. Immortality carries the weight of witnessing, remembering, and ensuring that vigilance is never abandoned. This fortress will survive because of what we endure, yet we must never forget why we endured it at all. Solara stepped close, her voice barely audible. The walls stand, Marshal, but hearts have changed. Loyalty proven in fire and betrayal alike will define every decision henceforth. Kyle nodded slowly, voice carrying both sorrow and resolve. Then let them learn and let them remember. The fortress is more than stone, more than cannon, more than survival. It is a testament to endurance, clarity, and courage. And as long as it stands, so too will the lesson endure. Vigilance, integrity, and the weight of consequence are eternal. The defenders of Bastion Primaris worked through the ruins, repairing, rebuilding, and quietly mourning. Some whispered prayers to ancestors long dead. Others made solemn vows to remember the lessons learned in fire, betrayal, and moral reckoning. The first fractures had become a crucible. The crucible had been endured, and the lessons had been learned. Kael Draven remained atop the spire, silent, watching, and reflecting. The fortress was intact. The siege had ended. The enemy was vanquished, for now. Yet the shadow of hesitation, the echo of betrayal, and the enduring responsibility of vigilance stretched far into the future. Immortality allowed him to witness it, yet it also demanded that he carry the burden of both memory and consequence indefinitely. Bastion Primaris had survived. The walls remained. The defenders endured. But the lessons of the siege, of fractures and loyalty, of courage and hesitation, were eternal. In every scar, every silent glance, every quiet decision henceforth, the memory of what had been endured would live on. And for Marshal Kael Draven, the final reflection was clear. Victory was never absolute. Survival was never simple. And the weight of consequence was the heaviest burden of all.